Hey, how y'all doing? Hope you're having a fantastic afternoon. Today I've got something a bit different for you. I have gotten a bunch of questions on recent videos asking about my recent PC hardware upgrade because I have been playing a bit differently in recent videos because it has actually affected my playstyle a bit. I upgraded my PC setup and it's changed the game a bit for me, and so people wanted to know my feelings, opinions, yada 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 on For Honor as an experience between the old gen consoles, new gen consoles, PC at different levels of hardware, and all of that, and kind of just do a bit of a comparative conversation. So that's what this is going to be. This is unscripted, it's going to be a bit rambly, I apologize for that, but I'm going to try and cover everything as well as I can. I don't expect to have any new revolutionary information that's going to totally change the game for anybody, but I do think that I have a bit of a unique perspective that I can offer and answer some questions for people who may have it, potentially people who are playing on the old gen systems and are looking at either upgrading to a new gen system or to a PC, or for people who are looking to get into the game, or really just people who are curious. I will talk about how I feel about the game on different systems and how it affects me and my playstyle and my preferences and reactions and all of those good things. So if you really like this video, I appreciate it a lot. Leave a like, helps me out a whole ton, and if you haven't subscribed, please do. And with that, let's go ahead and get to it. So I did mention that I've played on a couple different levels of PC hardware, so I'm going to go into some more detail on that real quick. When I first started playing PC was about a year ago. I got a gaming PC from a friend, and it was about a 2014 gaming PC. It had a 970 in it. It could run For Honor at medium-high settings at about 90 frames, but I had a 60 hertz monitor, so I was stuck seeing 60 frames, and that was my PC For Honor experience for quite a while. And I did notice some difference in my gameplay even with that, but it wasn't incredibly noticeable, and I could still switch back and forth without too much difficulty. And actually, a lot of times I played better when I was playing on the Xbox versus playing 60 FPS For Honor. Then there was a period of about three months after that where I had upgraded my monitor, and so I was able to see the full 90-ish frames that I was getting in For Honor per second. And that was when I really noticed kind of this, I don't know, this effect of feeling like I was being pushed over this hump, right? Because I was able to light parry on reaction, these 500 millisecond reduced indicator lights, post CCU, was right about that 90 frame mark for me, was when it started to be pretty reasonable if the person had decent latency. And that was when it started to get consistent, which was a big deal for me, and it definitely changed my gameplay a bit, but it didn't totally revolutionize anything. I still had to, stress a bit to get it, and it was still pretty tight, and it still wasn't super easy, and so it didn't change a ton, but it was definitely, it was definitely noticeable for me at that time. So now that I've talked about my, PC hardware situation and my history there, for those of you guys who don't know, I did play on Xbox primarily for the vast majority of my time playing For Honor, from beta up through about that time about a year ago. That was what I played primarily, and I also got a PS4 around that time, and I was playing some with friends and doing some training over on PS4 for about the last year as well. And so that's my experience between the different systems, and the vast majority of my playtime still lies on Xbox One. I guess first I might as well start and just talk about how I play differently on each of these systems, right? So I didn't think it would be as big a difference as it was, because I was playing on PC some at 60 frames, and I didn't change my playstyle a whole lot. And that I want to be clear, and that's why I think that my playstyle would also, if I were to have a next-gen console, I think that my playstyle would be fairly similar to the way I played on the Xbox One and on 60 FPS PC. And it is still fairly different, the most different from where I am now, with, higher end PC For Honor frame rates. And so the big thing now is, back then, I didn't feel that I was someone who struggled a lot with light spam, kind of like everybody on console. I it wasn't fun. It was something that was definitely a nuisance. It wasn't a total joke. It wasn't easy to deal with, but it was definitely something that I learned to deal with, and it wasn't something that I would ever have considered a struggle for me on Xbox One. But the way I dealt with it wasn't by just, snagging one out of the air with a parry the very next light. Normally, I would resort to blocking and then try and wait for frame advantage, get in with a heavy or a Celtic Curse, try to use hyper armor and take advantage that way. I remember distinctly, and especially after going back to watch some videos to try and remember how my Xbox playstyle really worked, it was a lot about, taking advantage of frame advantage and trying to keep, at least since I play Highlander primarily, keep offensive stance going and keep them in a heavy kick kind of style mix up, and all the way until you run out of stamina, and not to let them out of it until you're fully exhausted, and then to back away, go on the defensive, and then try to reinitiate, most likely with hyper armor or with good frame advantage or something along those lines. But it wasn't nearly so willy-nilly, and I wasn't willing to ever to give that up, right? Whereas on PC, I take a very different approach to it now that I've upgraded my hardware. Before, I didn't do this at all, but now, with 165 frame for honor, now I will go into a fight and I'll establish frame advantage and I'll keep frame advantage for a while, but then I'll give a light and I'll end and I'll cancel out of offensive and I'll bait for a parry, because my giving up frame advantage gives them an opportunity to use a light to interject. Now, I could still continue with lights. I guess I recognize that it's not true frame advantage, but if I am playing as a Highlander, if I use a light in offensive stance, I can't get a kick or a grab or a heavy or anything else out before another light would hit me other than a light. So in that situation, on Xbox or at 60 frame for honor, I never would have given up that advantage of having frame advantage to throw an offensive light, unless I was going to throw a lot of them. And that was because the risk-reward ratio wasn't worth it for me, because unless I really knew and had gotten a good read on the person I was fighting, I didn't feel that I had a really good chance of getting that parry. So instead, I would keep going with my heavies, and I would keep my frame advantage as long as possible before giving it up. A lot of times now, I find myself giving up my frame advantage on PC and waiting for a light parry just to try and goad them with that same frame advantage situation. And that's not something a situation I would have ever put myself in before. And so recently, when I've tried to go back and play For Honor on Xbox and play, do fight clubs with my friends on Discord and do things along those lines, I've struggled to figure out what my playstyle should be and how I should adapt back towards my old school playstyle. And I have figured it out, and it mostly really is about being more aggressive, really pushing the offense as far as you can and keeping that frame advantage until it's really time to give it up, because I don't feel that I can reliably get a parry by giving up that advantage the way that I can on PC. Another thing that's different about my playstyle on each system is, not only do you have to consider the way that you can defend against the attacks that people are putting onto you, but also the way that, your opponents deal with your own offense as well. And, for example, as soon as I started playing on PC, I noticed, well, hey, I may not be a reaction monster, right? Because I was playing at 60 frames then, and I was not able to light parry on reaction even on PC. But I did notice that I was playing against people very regularly who would parry every light that I threw the entire match. And so I would go, okay, well, I gotta be more careful about that, and I'm not gonna do that anymore. And I would change the way that I played. I would be much more defensive. I wouldn't throw my lights out as easily. I'd be careful with my Celtic Curses even, right? On old gen consoles, you can get away with your Celtic Curses pretty regularly. It's pretty easy to spam them. People can't react super consistently very often, but it definitely does happen. Whereas on PC, it seems almost everybody will parry your left or right Celtic Curse pretty much every time. So that is definitely something to be careful about. And so I'm careful with my own offense for sure when I'm playing on PC. Whereas on console, I know that the new systems are out, and I'll have to start being more careful over time, but at the end of my time playing on console, and when I go back on console occasionally, I find myself pretty willing to throw out lights in assumption that it won't get parried, and to be much more aggressive until I get punished, and then I'll start adapting from there, because I don't assume going in that somebody can deal with my lights or can parry on reaction, because in my experience, the vast majority of people on console still can't. So one more thing to mention about playing on Xbox and PS4 was that, I was playing primarily off of hard reads in that situation. So if I got a light parry, it really was I've seen this pattern in this player, and I think that the, Shaman's going to soft feint to a top light, so let's go for the parry. And I would really only do that when I was quite sure, because it was truly a hard read. Whereas at 90 frame for honor, and maybe even a little bit at 60 frame for honor on PC, I was able to do more of a soft read, where I would go, okay, this is a prepared reaction now. I am going to keep my guard on the right, but if I see a flicker of red towards the top, I can parry this shaman soft feint, and I was able to do it in that way. But if I didn't know what side the light was going to be coming from, it was probably gone. I could only choose if I really knew the side and I knew it for sure was coming, and I just had to wait to see that flicker, and then it could be on reaction, and I could still block from a different direction if that attack didn't go through. And that was about where I was sitting at 90 frame for honor, whereas now at 165 frame for honor, it's more like, I'll block this, and if you throw a light from any side at all, I'll be able to react not only to the light, but also to what side it's coming from, and I don't even have to have that as a prepared reaction beforehand. If I see it, I'll probably snap it up. Now, I don't know what the official numbers are, but I figured I would cite. Recently, I did a poll on my channel community tab. Check it out if you haven't. But I asked people what systems they played on, if they played on multiple, or how the split of my subscribers went as far as what system they're playing on. So this is the graph, and this is what I saw. 31% playing on Xbox One, 38% playing on PS4, 3% playing on the Series SX or the PS5 respectively. So 6 total between the next gens, and then 24% playing on PC. And this does align pretty well with what I expected, and that's out of a sample size of around 1,000 votes. So the next thing to talk about as far as comparing these different experiences as a player, right, is, the playing field that you're in. So, one interesting thing before the release of the next gen consoles, if you were playing on Xbox, playing on PS4, you knew that if somebody was a parry monster, and if they were snagging everything, and they were really beating you badly, that was them. That was all coming from their skill. That was all coming from, most likely, right? It was all coming from their skill or for something that they've done. Whereas on PC, you'll always have it in the back of your head, like, especially if you're at 60, 80 FPS, kind of lower end PC situation. You always kind of wonder, you're like, was that person in the same hardware range as me and just playing better, or did that person have a 240, hertz setup, and, it's just a completely different experience for them, and maybe I would beat them if I had that same advantage. It's always something that comes to mind. It's not necessarily a huge thing, but it is definitely something you think about. And it is true that on PC, someone can always pay more to get a little bit nicer of an experience. And I do think there's diminishing returns. I think once you get up to 120 FPS for honor, you're doing pretty darn great. You can compete with basically anybody. There's not a huge difference past then, but there is a difference. It doesn't do nothing. To upgrade past that, and I certainly can attest to the difference between 90 or 120 and then 165. Definitely helps. It's not drastic, it's not amazing, it's not completely revolutionary, but it does certainly matter. It definitely does something, and having that surety of the levelness of the playing field on console is definitely something that's worth considering. I mean, now of course with the next gen systems, that's no longer the case. You still have the vast majority of console players who are playing on old systems, but now if you're playing on the console platforms, your only question is, okay, is that guy on a next gen? And if you're on a next gen, because that's really the experience we're probably talking about here. There's no up from there, right? In terms of, at least until, if ever crossplay becomes a thing. But short of that, right, the only question you really have is, okay, what did, how much of a beast is this person? How are they doing this? Because you can know that if you go out there and you buy yourself a PS5 or an Xbox Series X and you start playing For Honor, that at that point you've got basically an even playing field, as long as you're not playing on a TV with huge input delay or something along those lines. Then you've got the same setup as the people you're going to be playing against, and that that can certainly be a valuable part of the experience, because I know that playing it 60 frame For Honor for me wasn't a terrible experience, but I definitely don't think it's as ideal as playing, like, between the two. If you could choose between, do I play For Honor at 60 frames on PC or do I play on a next gen, you definitely play on a next gen. I mean, you're gonna get the even playing field, or the sloped playing field where you're the king of it, and you're not dealing with anything past that point. Plus the new consoles are just pretty sweet. But yeah, I mean, as far as it goes, I mean, my experience with PC was always pretty good. But I even know some people who are clinging to the PC experience per se at less than an ideal setup, where it's maybe they're getting 50 or less than 60 even stable frames per second on PC, and they've got certain hardware struggles, or they've got their graphics turned down a lot to get to that point. And in their mind, they're still kind of reaching towards that ideal, that perfect gameplay situation. And in my mind, they're probably having a worse time than someone just playing on an old gen system, because at least at that point most of the people are on the same level as you. Whereas if you're playing especially sub 60 frame PC For Honor, you've got a competitive disadvantage I mean, I don't know this for a fact, I would have to do a lot of research, but my guess would be it's upwards of 80%, 90% of the PC player base would have a pretty hard competitive advantage for you. So at that point, I mean, even if your 50 frame PC For Honor experience is smoother than and feels nicer to you than your 30 frame Xbox One experience, it probably still makes more sense for you, at least from a competitive viability standpoint, to play on a console, because you've just got such a huge competitive disadvantage versus a large portion of the PC player base. And that's something that you'll always have to pay to deal with, which is just kind of part of the reality of PC. I mean, I don't know about everybody. My PC is certainly a high-end PC, but I paid almost $2,000 for my PC, and I'm super happy with it, and I use it a lot every day, and it means a ton to me. But at that same point, I mean, it's not really in the cards for most people to do something like that. And this kind of segues us into another important part of the video, but I do think that the next gen consoles, as far as bang for your buck and getting yourself in a good place to have the best casual matchmaking experience, is probably the way to go. And that may be a question to some people. I think most people will understand what I'm getting at when I say that, right? But it's not that if you were to ask me, hey, Fiend, would you trade your current PC setup for the PS5 or for the Xbox Series X? No, I wouldn't. I like the experience that I'm getting at 165 frames. It looks so good and feels so good, and it would be hard for me to give up at this point, right? But as either an old gen console, or even as just a prospective, theoretical new buyer who is looking to get into For Honor and casual matchmaking, right? You're not a tournament player. We're just talking about casual matchmaking, even high-level casual matchmaking, right? But I think your best bang for your buck money kind of experience with the most staying power, admittedly, is going to be is going to be the next gen consoles. I mean, I certainly wouldn't recommend somebody moving into an old gen console right now. I mean, other than maybe to learn the game, just because it's going to be more punishing and it's going to be more difficult. And then as far as PC is concerned, like I said, I mean, unless you're a gamer who wants a PC to not only play For Honor, but probably to do a lot more gaming beside, or to do other kind of tasks with, and you want a high-end PC, then go for it. But otherwise, you know, I really think that the amount of money you would have to spend to get into PC For Honor at a high enough hardware level that you don't have a competitive disadvantage to a large portion of the PC player base, you would have to spend at least twice what you would have to get into a next-gen console. That's my prediction. It may even be more than that. It may not be quite as dramatic as that, but that's how I see it. And so I do think that, you know, especially if you can get one for, you know, actual MSRP and you're not paying scalper prices, that the next gen systems are really going to be the target for people for Honor, especially based on, you know, those percentages I was showing you earlier with the percentage of the player base and how it's split up. I mean, you've got not drastically higher, but regardless of what system you're on, especially if you're on PS4, you have a larger player base and you'll have faster matchmaking times and an overall better experience in random matchmaking on a console than you will on PC. Maybe a little bit pointless to say, but you know, my current 165 frame setup, right, I feel that, you know, maybe some of the balancing intentions of the devs have still even fallen a little short of what they were intending as far as breaking up the defensive meta. I mean, the light parries and things along those lines are so much easier at higher hardware levels that it seems that more work still needs to be done before a lot of heroes like Shaolin or people like that can really play the game the way that they're meant to at that kind of hardware level at all anyway. And another big advantage of playing on, I think the next gen consoles is going to be that meta, the next gen console meta, as that develops more over time, is going to be, I think, the safest place for the overall balance of the game, because the devs would have to speed things up still quite a bit more than they already have to make it so that a ridiculously small percentage of people could parry lights on reaction even at 240 frames or something absurd like that, right? Or 165. In those situations, I think that most people on any hardware less than that would be like, this is just absurd, this is just way too fast, this just doesn't make sense. And so your meta is more protected, I think, in the next gen console world, right? Because at that point, the people with really good reactions will be potentially able to parry things on reaction on console a little bit more, or will be able to participate in mix-ups more effectively, or track the flow of the game better, and all of these things that come as a benefit of higher frame rate, but only to an extent, and not to the extent where your hero is Shaolin or somebody along those lines is no longer viable because you can't initiate because people are parrying your opener every time. And that's important when it comes to playing on PC, is trying to figure out how to avoid people parrying your opener every time with certain heroes. And I think that you're more protected from that kind of experience, and you'll have more ability to choose to play who you want to within the meta on next gen consoles. And one thing I want to say before we wrap this up too is just that everybody's going to have totally different experiences with this kind of thing. I don't want to tell you, I certainly don't want anybody to feel that I'm telling them how, the game needs to be, or that, that they're react too slow or XYZ, anything along those lines, right? know that everybody's going to have a drastically different experience in this game, and I know that people, on the next gen consoles, some feel that things are still too fast even on a next gen console and it's hard to parry. I know other people who feel that they can parry pretty much everything on reaction, almost even on the old gen consoles, and definitely can on the new gen. And so it totally depends on where you fall in that, and that's totally okay. I just want to give my general impressions of what I see of the playing field of For Honor and how it's affected me in my own play. But thank you guys all for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I will try and get some more gameplay for you guys someday here soon. Take care, and see you again soon.